This is my first Biosemiotics conference I'm attending. I come from a somewhat different direction, but with a lot of overlap from hermeneutics. I wrote a book on Dilthey, for example, his life philosophy. So it's more in the cultural realm. And then I went also to work on Plester, which is, in a certain sense, a student of Dilthey in the biological realm, because I don't know whom of you is familiar with Plester or knew his name. Yeah. Not Betty, but I will not talk on Plester today. Yeah. And Dilthey is very interesting because more recently I wrote a contribution to a book on Dilthey, in which I present Dilthey, who's mostly known for his work in the Geisteswissenschaften and the cultural sciences, as a philosopher of the life sciences, because he wrote a lot on Darwin and on biology, and a very interesting thinker. Well, one of my basic themes in my work has been the continuity of non-living nature, living nature, and self-conscious nature, if I may phrase it this way. And at this moment, I'm working on this theme from the perspective of databases. The database understood as a dominant cultural form in the present-day sciences and technologies. I will think more about this in my talk. My thesis is that databases are not only an ontological metaphor that helps us to make sense of the world, but it also functions as a material metaphor in the sense that those who work with computers make everything, turn everything, transform everything into a database. And that is not only the case for the natural world, think about genes that are often considered to be a database, but also in the cultural realm. Think about internet with databases behind them, where you can customize your own Nike shoes, etc., with the help of a big database behind it. So that is my theme, and that's why the provocative title I chose from the periodic system via genes to large language models. Nowadays in the Netherlands, there's a lot of interest in so-called forgotten vegetables. I don't know if you know this term. I'm fond of forgotten vegetables, but also of forgotten philosophers. And today I want to talk about Cassirer, because he was very helpful for me. I'm writing a book at this moment on database ontology, as I call it. And Cassirer plays an important role in that. And I think he's also of interest for biosemiotics, to help the gaps, to bridge the gaps between those different realms of the non-living world, the living world, and the conscious world, so the meaningful world, if I use this phrase. I just inserted a slide during one of the presentations this morning about the musical metaphor. I will also come back to that, because Dilthey, it was traced back to 1900, I think, but already, yeah, the book was 2004, but it was from the 80s. This he taught from lived experiences are related to each other as motives, as an andante or a symphony. They are unfolded, explication, and what has been unfolded is then recapitulated or taken together, implication. It's a very interesting kind of way also to think about databases, because a musical composition is also a recombination of existing tones and files, etc. And you take it together and you create something from the database. And well, we come back to that. I have 7 short points. Well, the second is a little bit longer because you're maybe not so familiar with Cassirer. Who knows Cassirer of you? But yeah, the name. And are you familiar with his philosophy? Or yeah, so that's three. What Bell doing? Yeah. So that's why I will use a little bit more words for the second point. So don't be afraid that it will be very long, because some of the other points are only one sheet, so to say. Cassirer, why is he interesting also for biosemiotics? Although he plays a very modest role. I searched on the Journal of Biosemiotics, and there are 28 mentions of Cassirer, mostly in footnotes, about that he was a colleague of von Utzkel in Hamburg. That's mostly what was said. So, and it's remarkable because not only that he was influenced by von Utzkel, and also Morris, he also refers to Morris, so, but also he made very fruitful contributions to the philosophy of biology, and gave biology also an increasingly important role in the semiotic project. But probably his greatest merit, he brought the philosophy of nature into under one semiotic heading. So that was, I think, what makes him an outstanding philosopher within this domain of semiotics. Of course, there is semiotics of nature and of culture, but not so many people are putting them together under one heading. And Cassirer's philosophy of symbolic forms and black prices is harmless as the semiotic sense. Okay, so the philosophy of symbolic forms. I have one slide, some backgrounds, general backgrounds of Cassirer. He's a Kantian, and as such, you can call him a transcendental idealist. That means an idealist not that the whole world is a product of some spirit, but he's a realist. There's a world out there, but the way we conceive this world, the way we understand this world, is depending on the form, the a priori forms we use to when we confront the world. Confront them. They are mediated by a priori forms. In the sense of Kant, that means that there is kind of anthropocentrism involved here. An epistemological anthropocentrism in the sense we cannot understand the world in other forms than human forms. We can try to imagine what it is to be a bat, Thomas Davis, but that's a very difficult thing. So it's not a normative kind of anthropocentrism in the sense that the humans are better or superior or whatever. There's a kind of epistemological problem. Cassirer not only follows Kant, but he also transforms. Because unlike Kant, who talked about the a priori forms as sheer cognitive, mental things, or Cassirer, inspired by Deeltijk of Sweet, that was the precedent. The a priori is first of all historical. That's, I think, especially referring to Deeltijk, who will critique the historical region. It's also embodied and embedded. It's also extended and externalized in the sense in symbolic forms. They are not only forms of mind, but they are also materialized in institutions, in artifacts, in houses, or all the material things that are part of it. So, in order to distinguish these a priori forms from the Kantian ones, he calls them symbolic forms. His philosophy of symbolic forms is summarized in 3 volumes, which we have published in 2009. One on language, one critical thinking on science, vision. And in order to understand this whole project, there is one important thing, and it's also, I think, very close to the first presentation today, because every visual experience is pregnant with meaning. So, for example, take this as an example Cassirer gives himself. If you see this, what is this? Well, it could be a magical symbol. If you see it, for example, an old cave, that's pretty magical. It can also be an artistic ornament. You see it in a painting or architectural form, or it can be sinus figure, mathematical figure. And it completely depends on the context. If you see this in a scientific article, well, then you see that must be that's to do with mathematics. No, science also has a magical aspect of it, but mostly it's not neat. Second important stuff to see is that there are three types of symbolization. The first one is what he calls Ausdruck. Now we may say expression in English. It's an immediate expression of an experience. And then we can also try to put it in words. It's objectivation words. That's the Darstellung in German. And we can also find a formalization for it. So this same figure we saw first can also be put in words. This is a sinusoid, or we can put it in a mathematical equation in order to give it a formal expression. And the interesting thing, this is most closely to immediate experience. It's very concrete. Here we find the kind of objectivation if we use concepts more general, not one particular leaf, but we talk about the leaf as a concept. And if we find a mathematical expression for it, then it's even more abstract. It's even more useful to refer to also share its formal characteristics, so to say. Well, he only finished 3 volumes, but he mentions more symbolic forms. For example, art, religion, morality, law, history, economy, technology. You might say that the reason that he wrote those 3 are because they are the 3 most typical forms for expression. It's expressions almost. Linguistic objectivation has to do with language, of course, and the formalization is science. So for that reason, those 3 volumes are the 3 basic categories. And for example, from myth, in the course of history, art and religion emerges. And language is the kind of basic symbolic form which morality, moral history are expressed. And science, especially it's rise to whole set different sciences and technologies also. Well, they give meaning to often broken world. There are fundamental, it's most fundamental human domains, and the number of symbolic forms cannot determine them for once and all because they change. For example, sciences they develop and also differentiate. Recently, mathematics, there are 3,200 subdisciplines. 3,200. I have a colleague who's a brilliant mathematician. He says, well, 2 or 3 related to major math specialization, I can understand what they are doing, but for all the others, just to like ours, to grasp it. I cannot judge myself. They can take some object. For example, you can also, from an economic perspective, look at art or activity. They are universal in the sense that we find them in all cultures, although many different variations. For example, myth found in almost all cultures, but they are very different culture. And they appear in certain chronological order. Use outputs. Okay. I think that's why you are. Yeah. Okay. You can also criticize Cassirer on different points, of course. One of them is that he says, well, only humans use symbols. Animals only use signs. Of course, humans also use signs, but we also are symbolic. But we can doubt that. I read an interesting article from some weeks ago. This is a nest of a magpie in Antwerp, near the the hospital there, the university hospital. And this is fortified by bird pins, bird spines. And the magpies, they took them from the roof of the hospital. They took them from the roof of the hospital. Why? To make their nest crow-proof. Because crows like to eat the magpie's eggs. So I find this very interesting because this is not only, you cannot explain this if these birds cannot, in one way or another, make a metaphorical transposition, so to say. They can look at the pin on the roof as something that you can eat for your nest. And so that's a very interesting way of symbolic thinking in bird feeding. Well, my point here, what I like to stress is that in one of his last articles on symbolic forms in 1930, of course, he wrote some others, but when he introduced a new symbolic form, was in 1930, forming technique, in which he says also technology is a symbolic form. And they are not about thinking, but about doing. They emerge from magic, but the power of will replaces here the power of desire. In magic, you hope that with magical practices you can control the world. In technology, you're actually doing it. And they lead to practical understanding. He says that was the first way we, for example, learned to understand causal laws. But also, we see ourselves as practical agents. Can do something with the world. So that's an interesting point. And also here, technology is not something that starts with humans. This is also a form of technology. And one of my favorite biologists, Lynn Margulis, says technology is really much older than Homo sapiens. This morning I had a beautiful talk about the microbes. And Lynn Margulis was a microbiologist, and she says, well, already the bacteria, they were doing technology in the sense that they really changed their environment in order to make it more better to support their life one, so to say. Because that's an interesting thing. One of the articles in Biosemiotics I always like to refer to is of Marcello Barbieri. He says life is essentially about three things. It's about manufacturing objects, technology. It's about assembling objects into functional structures, which are also, the thing I learned from Dennis Noble, he says, well, functionality and intention are the two sides of the same coin, the two sides of the same coin. What we, from a third person perspective, describe as such. From a first person perspective, intention, and it's about the world. And in a certain sense, go back to Morris and the three levels of semiotics. Syntax have elements that are arranged in certain time or space arrangement. It's about pragmatics, it's about what they do with the receiving system. And if I read in the newspaper, it's going to rain today, I take my umbrella, so that's pragmatics. And of course, I have to understand it. So if I am in China and I see the weather forecast in Chinese characters, I will not bring my umbrella. Don't affect that Chinese. Okay. What is very interesting in article on technology with Cassirer is that he says And that's already part of his philosophy of symbolic forms, what I already referred to, that there is a kind of ongoing abstraction. Here he gives another layer, or he has another layer on it. He says it's going in technology from the actual to the possible. To the possible. You can, you are not confident with the, or you're not. You're not satisfied with the reality as it is, but you want to change it in a specific way. You want to make, you want to explore the possibilities and use it. And my thesis, which I'm developing since a decade or 1.5 or something like that, is that technology is increasingly linked to other symbolic forms. That's already a point Cassirer himself made. He says technology in the modern world has become the kind of lingua franca, you could say, of all symbolic forms. It's in science we use technology, but also in economy we use technologies to produce goods, to read. We need books that are printed, technology produced, or use the internet, etc., etc. My thesis is that the database, and that's not Cassirer, that's my own point, and it has to do, of course, that in the time Cassirer wrote, the database was not yet existing. The database has become the dominant manifestation of the symbolic technology. And not only as a worldview, we start to look at everything from a perspective of databases, but also the dominant technology to do so. And here we see continuity between nature and culture as well. There is a continuous combination, recombination, and decombination of elements. Well, what if we talk about databases? Well, there are three meanings. You can say a database is a collection of data, but it is also, of course, an abstract model of how to organize data. And then you also have the concrete software packages of database. But especially the model is interesting. You can say, in general, a database consists of 4 basic operations: add, browse, change, and destroy. And so you can insert new data, you can select certain data, you can update when there's a change, and you can delete it. That's all the SQL and the structured query language basic for operations. Well, a telephone book, the older ones among you still remember them. That's a database. In a sense, you have data. They are ordered in a specific way alphabetically. You can browse them, and you can change if somebody dies. Then you have to replace it in the next edition. It's very handy, but also very inflexible, because if you want to change something, you have to reprint the whole book. And the postman was looking terrified because he had to distribute all those telephone books. the worst week in the year, so to say. Then we have the card index books. Maybe you remember them from the library. They are more flexible because you can add cards, you can remove cards, you can change cards by writing about them. But the point is, for every dimension of the database, you have to make a separate card. For one on author, one on subject, one on publisher, etc. And then we have the spreadsheet, which was, of course, a huge step forward, because by simply click on a column, you can rearrange the whole database. And the most refined version is the relational database. Actually, the flexibilization is here most maximum, because in order to do so, you have to atomize all the things that you want to put in the database. So the most elementary elements, because otherwise they will be double in the database data. After that, you have actually a virtual collection of all logical relationships. And that's a huge number of relationships you find there. And with the help of queries, you can make those implicit relations explicit. So if you put all the information of all the inhabitants of Rotterdam, it would say, well, I want to have the set of women of between 32 and 33 that have a Mercedes and like Harry Potter. Let's say something weird. If you have put everything, all the data in the database, you can easily find this subset. And this is a kind of magic, again, going back from technology to mention that you can say, actually, if you put everything in the database, you can search everything. You can find answers to every question in the world, every question you can imagine. Well, for basic, I will not go into detail here. But the interesting thing is, if you look in psychology nowadays, memory is no longer a kind of storage system. No, every memory is a reconstruction with a kind of database. You have memory traces and you recombine them. And that's why if you look, you ask witnesses of a car accident, for example, what happened, you hear different stories. Not because one is right and the others are wrong, but everyone recombines a specific subset, which is also a certain aspect. If you think about organizations, nowadays they are combinations and recombinations of parts. And you have to outsource things. You have to take over other aspects of other companies. That's also interesting. If you want to buy a pair of shoes, you can recombine your own shoes. For example, if you want the Nike, you can choose the color, you can choose the material, the form, etc. And then if you enter the last customization starts, and so now in China, probably they will start building your customized shoe. Well, and of course, now we are already almost at the end, 46, Darwin in the database. Also, here we can think about this model as a model to think biology. Also, in the case of genes, you have elements, you have a database, a gene pool, and you can recombine them in many different ways. Now you might say, this is very close to neo-Darwinism. No, not necessarily. In neo-Darwinism, DNA is conceived of as a program that creates. And one thing I learned from Noble when we worked together in an MLO program was that he said, well, no, the first thing we have to do, that's in chapter 1 of the Music of Life, is to see it's not a programmed DNA, it's a database used by the organism. The organism, if it uses a specific protein, it uses the right genes to produce it. So there is downward causation here. There's downward causation at the use of the DNA. So, DNA is not programmed in the concept of life. This is a translation made by Dennis himself of the Dutch introduction and outro of the Dutch translation of the music. But he liked especially this cartoon that was made of the mocking Noble, and Dawkins here at this moment still is thinking that neo-Darwinism rules the world. No, it's changed nowadays. And also the practical thing is, of course, here part of it. Gene editing is seen by many as a kind of holy grail of bioindustry. And if we look at language models, that's the same, of course. ChatGPT is nothing else than a reshuffling of existing elements in the database. Has nothing to do with intelligence. And just like the DNA without an organism is dead material, as Noble expresses it, words in a database without a user who makes meaningful combinations is also nothing. It's a kind of parasite. If you look at it in semiotic terms, then you can say it's a parasitic relationship. And the humans are used by ChatGPT as a business model. We all are laborers without being paid. Yeah, well, we have to pay nowadays. It's open. It was open access that it was promised, but it's not the case. So this is an interesting model to connect, and of course, there's a lot of other aspects. It's just a kind of basic model, and I conclude with this. My claim is not that the universe is database. It's a symbolic form. It's a way to look at the world. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying this is what happens. This is what happens around us in the sciences, in the economy, and even in language processing. Also, Semiotic here. If you put it in ChatGPT without competent users that can also make it meaningful what the output is, then you have no meaning. There are positive ways of using it. I think, for example, what Dennis Noble did with database as a model to say, well, that's a good concept to conquer the neo-Darwinian idea that it's a kind of computer program. That is a good use. But there are also many dangers, and that's with every metaphor of this. Used to understand and indirect the world, but also to misunderstand and also do interact in a way that is very dangerous. As a material metaphor, it transforms at least the part of the universe. We are really changing the world as it is, but we have the survival of the fittest now. And that's also the title of the commentary I did in the Dutch translation of the music of life of Noble, because the struggle between Dennis Noble and Richard Dawkins has ultimately with metaphor. And Noble has made part also of our discussions, changed a little bit. In the first edition, in 2006, he says, well, metaphors are nothing of a kind of furnish. And we use them to say something a bit more eloquent. Yeah. But they are much more than that. Metaphors are the kind of models to use at the world. They are ontological, in Lakoff Johnson's kind of a sense. They are the way we organize the world. We make meaning of the world. And we make a world which is there, but quite chaotic and understandable. And the database is one of those models that is now dominant as a total matter. Thank you.